Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tablas Creek semi-weekly Instagram live broadcast. I'm Jason Haas, as always. My guest this week is a winemaker who I have admired for a long time. He's one of the founders of the Rhone Rangers movement, and in fact, the Rhone Rangers organization that we are a part of and that I'm very involved in. I can't wait to talk to him. This is, of course, Bill Easton of Domaine de la Terre Rouge and Easton Wines up in the Sierra Foothills. I will be inviting him to join in just a couple of minutes, but while we wait for people to sign on, as I always do, I'll share a few pictures of what's going on here at the vineyard. We got kind of twin paths going on. One is we're trying to get the vineyard under control and ready for the growing season, which means after a wet winter, we're doing lots of thinning. So it's basically shoot thinning, trying to get laterals off, open up things to light and air. We are in the middle, or really at the beginning of flowering. So let me share what the different grapes look like. So first, Viognier, which is in full flower. It's not, if you've never seen flowering before, you can be excused for thinking it's maybe not all that exciting. But that white fuzz you see on those clusters is flowering, and it smells amazing in the vineyard. And it's an important marker point. We are a little later than we usually are for flowering, and that's a function of it being cool this spring. But things are looking good. It happens on a continuum like everything else. So it's the early grapes that are in flowering, like Viognier and Grenache that you see here. Grapes that sprout later and ripen later, like Mourvedre, still not flowering. You can see just the little flower buds there, but none of the little white fuzz. And then something like Counoise is still probably the farthest off. You can see the buds are still tight, not even close. In the cellar, we are working on finishing up the red blending. So it's a picture of Chelsea in the lab this morning, trying to make sure that all the pieces together. We are going to be tasting all 18 different red wines that we're making from 2023 this afternoon. So look for a story about that on the blog. Okay, that's it. That's the quick intro as to what's going on. I will... works as well as the test that we did worked. This will all be super straightforward. Excellent. Hello, my friend.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
So I'm wearing my homage to Jason Haas hat. This is a hat that I picked up one time when I was in Paso Robles at a local store. I was down there, of course, for Rhone Rangers. And this is a classic El Rancho hat. So I thought it was appropriate. So hello, Jason. Thanks for having me on your show.
I'm honored. Of course, it is often very sunny down here in Paso Robles, and a good hat is super valuable. So I wonder, did you get it at Boot Barn? Like, was that your stop?
I think it was at Boot Barn or someplace like that. Actually, it could have been at a Western store further north somewhere, or maybe further south. I can't remember. It was over a decade ago. So, yeah.
Awesome. I like to start by asking winemakers sort of what was your first introduction to wine? Was it on your family table growing up, or was it something you came to later?
It was definitely on the family table growing up. My parents generally included wine as part of their meal every evening. And it wasn't extremely sophisticated wine, except on perhaps Saturday or Sunday night. But my folks always sought out the best at the time kind of artisan jug wine. And when I was a kid, there were a lot of Italian families that were still operating wineries in California that made incredibly well-made, respectable wines. But the wine that they settled on, actually, and not ironically, because I grew up in Sacramento, But the only surviving winery of Prohibition in Amador County, and the only winery, commercial winery in Amador County up until about 1970, was a winery called D'Agostini, and they made a blend of Zinfandel and Carignan and sold it in the jugs, and it was quite good. So that was our everyday house wine.
I love the idea of artisan jug wine. It's feels like an idea whose time has returned.
That would be a good thing, but I don't know about the cost efficacies of that happening.
For sure. Do you have a first wine that you remember, like the flavors of, as you were like becoming aware of wine?
Uh, I think the first wine was Zinfandel, and it was because I obviously there was a lot of Zinfandel around, but I recall my dad bringing home a Swan Zinfandel, and I just remember the purity of the spice and the berry flavors, the kind of raspberry fruit, and it was just awe-inspiring. So I developed a quick affection for Zinfandel, which we now know is a Mediterranean variety. I mean, it's a Croatian variety. Of course, we didn't know it then. We thought it was California's grape, and loved it, and have kind of come full circle with it. I mean, we make several single vineyard Zinfandels and a blended Zinfandel at our winery, plus a carbonic Zinfandel. And there is kind of something about Rhones and Zinfandel. Uh, they bring pleasure. They're both hedonistic varieties, I would say, or all hedonistic varieties.
And there's certainly also the connection that they tend to thrive in similar climates. I know that was one of the things that my dad and the parents were looking for when they were searching for land to found Tablas Creek, is they were looking for places where Zinfandel had thrived, because they felt that that was probably the best marker that they were going to find in California, because there was so little footprint of things like Grenache and Mourvedre, but there was a lot of footprint of Zinfandel. And finding where that had thrived, they thought would be an indicator of where Southern Rhone grapes would do well.
That was a smart method, I think. And we come from an area where Zinfandel is mostly dry farmed, so we don't irrigate it. But we're in an area where our average rainfall is around 30 inches a year. In 2023, we had close to twice that. And this year we're in the mid 40s somewhere. So rain's been good the last couple of years to us. And it's great for Zinfandel.
It's pretty glorious, really, to have had 2 wet years in a row. Like, what a treat. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice. And Zinfandel doesn't like to really be irrigated. It causes mildew problems and bunch rot problems. And so Amador is a great place for Zinfandel, along with, Grenache, Mourvedre, Syrah, and all the other great Rhone varietals.
So your start, like, in the business of wine, was not initially in making wine. You founded a really cool wine shop that's still around today, and Solano Cellars. Can you talk about that kind of era of your wine career?
Sure. I got into the wine business June of 1975. So I just graduated from UC Berkeley, and I needed a job. I had to pay the rent and buy some food. So, and then I was kind of like treading water, trying to decide whether I wanted to go on to graduate school or law school or do something. And, so it was a time to kind of, relax a little bit, work, and kind of reflect. And so actually, one of the guys that I bought my wine from when I was in college was a guy who wasn't an Italian legacy family, but he was a retired newspaper man who had one of the first urban wineries in California that he started in 1964 on San Pablo Avenue in Albany, California. And I used to buy gallons of Zinfandel from him that he bought or made at his winery, where he crushed 40 tons in 1974. Probably Sonoma County's in. Great stuff, because he had connections with all the great old vineyards and a lot of the great new vineyards. So I went to work for him in June of 1975 as he was just moving his operation from Albany to Healdsburg. His name was Davis Bynum,
Oh yeah.
and he was kind of the first guy to work with Joe Rocchioli. He did a lot of first things. He before Joel Peterson picked up the old Hill Ranch vineyard, we were making that Zinfandel at Davis Bynum. I got a truckload of old vines in 1980 because of my connection with Dave Bynum, and made my first home wine, or Zinfandel, which turned out splendidly. 1980 was a very cool vintage, high acid, wonderful wine from 100-year-old vines in the Dry Creek Valley. So anyway, he was my inspiration, and I got the bug immediately working for this guy. I helped him run a tasting room, which he had in Albany, and when he closed that a couple of years later, that's when I decided to start a wine shop in that same location. And initially, the wine shop was kind of a people's wine shop. I mean, we're in Berkeley, right? So it was like, make things reasonably priced and everything. We quickly realized, I had two partners at that time. We quickly realized that that wasn't a good business plan. So we started adding a few more expensive wines, and one thing led to another, and it became a pioneering wine shop on the West Coast. I owned it for 17 years before I sold it in 1994.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been a pretty dynamic time in the East Bay. I mean, you have sort of the whole kind of Chez Panisse, Kermit Lynch kind of nexus going on there. What was the scene like then?
It was definitely a really fantastic food scene. So you clicked off Kermit Lynch. We're very friendly with Kermit Lynch. They had some of the things they were doing. There was a lot of other dynamic importers in the San Francisco Bay Area, including Diamond Wine Merchants, which had a connection with Becky Wasserman and Christopher Cannan. I actually used them as a clearinghouse for some of my own direct imports. There was Wine Imports, which was connected to Draper and Esquin. There was I think a place called the Wine House. Grape Expectations was there. There was a whole cluster of guys that came out of Jackson's Liquor at Domingo and Ashby. Some of those guys started Grape Expectation. Another guy was named Gerald Jacobi. He started an import company. I think Mark DeGrazia from Italy was at Stanford for a while. Joel Butler, who's a master of wine now, was doing stuff then. There were other great chefs. Jeremiah Tower was there. That's when he did Santa Fe Bar and Grill. Mark Miller was there. He did 4th Street Grill. There was a very vibrant wine shop scene going on. There were great restaurants in Oakland. And then San Francisco, you could zip in and out of to a tasting. I remember going to a tasting with the Perrins at a seafood restaurant at Fisherman's Wharf, where our Francois brought wines all the way back to World War II. We tasted this incredible array of Beaucastel wines, and that kind of thing happened, like every couple of months.
So cool. So at what point in this, I mean, you started with Zinfandel, at what point in this did you get interested in Rhones?
I think it was, right in the early 1980s, I would say. I started selling a lot of Côte de Rhone, and I liked and then more of the elevated appellations like Gigondas and Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And then a lot of other Languedoc reds and Côte de Provence reds based on some of the same varieties. And I liked, like I said earlier, I liked the hedonistic aspect to these wines. So the 80s were like people were developing an attitude. Napa wines then, they'd gone through kind of the food thing where people were picking less ripes, and a lot of the wines were quite severe, kind of stern, tannic. Some of the Chardonnays were either overly oaky or just kind of uninteresting. So there was kind of a whole younger generation thing of ABC, anything but Chardonnay.
Cool. And you were, if if I've done my research properly, you were one of the attendees of the 1990 colloquium at Meadowood that my dad helped organize. That was like the first international meeting of like Rhone producers from the Rhone and Rhone producers from California. What am I right? And what was that like?
That was great. I mean, it was there were a lot of papers presented because at the time we were interested in learning about all the colonial origins of Syrah in California, and at that time we were trying to chase down how to make wines that had a lot of the savoriness and the smokiness and some of the kind of meatiness and gaminess that we liked about French Syrahs. And so we were chasing that through different clonal variations. Later, that grew in different directions, having to do with site, fermentation technique, and other factors. But I remember that as being a fairly academic environment. There was a booklet put together, which I think I still have a copy of in one of my files, of different papers that people presented about different aspects of Rhone varieties. So it definitely kicked things off. And there were a few, distributors there from around the United States. So I recall picking up one of my first out-of-state distributors at that event, which was Classic Wines in Massachusetts. A guy named Fred Eck, who I'm sure you're familiar with. He was a big, tall guy that drove like a VW Beetle.
Sounds just right. I know that was the idea when my dad kind of came up with that, was that would be reciprocated by the French on a regular schedule every 4 years or so, though that never happened. And it seemed like it wasn't really until Hospice du Rhone got started that there was this regular interchange of ideas back and forth between France and America. But meanwhile, the Rhone Rangers group was getting together. How involved were you at the beginning of the formation of that, and what was that crew like?
I was there day one with the Rhone Rangers group. So initially, it was people interested in making wines from Rhone varieties in California. And as I recall, there were about a dozen of us at the time. So there was some kind of Jungian collective consciousness going on because it wasn't just one person that kind of came up with this idea of doing Rhone stuff in California. So a dozen of us gathered together for the first meeting, which was at a restaurant down the street from my wine shop called La Lime's. And we did a dinner, I think the first one, or maybe that could have been the planning dinner, but it was out back on their patio. And then a little bit later, they moved to a new location, and then I think we did one or two events at that location as well. And, some people wanted to formalize the group into a formal organization, which it became. I was kind of I was more kind of anarchical about it at the time, and I just like these kind of informal gatherings and get-togethers. And I think we threw a public tasting at one point. I'm not exactly sure of the timeline on that, but it was probably within a year of our first meeting.
One of the things I think that was so fascinating about those early Rhone Rangers years is that there was really no consensus as to like where these grapes did best or how they did best. People were trying them everywhere. Like they were trying them at cool spots and warm spots, high spots and low spots, every different soil type, all over geographically, all over California. Must have been really kind of cool and dynamic, and like everybody figuring it all out at the same time.
Yeah, it was, and everybody was tasting everybody's wines, and seeing results that maybe they wanted to get in their wines. But we were also searching around. I mean, my first wine was based on what I call it an antique vineyard. Now we'd call it a historical vineyard site But my concept when I started out was to do something more that was like a Southern Rhone blend. So Grenache, Mourvedre, Syrah. And the reason for that is at the time in Amador, I found a lot of the wines to have a lot of rusticity. So I thought one of the ways to manage the rusticity of the wines, and I'd include tannin in that, was to do some blending. And I found a Grenache vineyard, that another winery found too far away to deal with, and it was small, and they were a larger winery, so it wasn't as significant to them. So it was a 4-acre Grenache vineyard that was the remnants of, I think, a 40-acre Grenache vineyard that had been planted like in the 1920s. And so my first blends were based on that Grenache with some Mourvedre I got from Oakley, and then some Syrah I got locally. I think there was a guy up here who planted some Syrah in 1983, the Sentinel Oak Vineyard. So I was able to start working with that fruit. So, as I was piecing together. I mean, I didn't have the capital that a lot of other people did. I mean, some of the other people in the group had a lot more financial resources. So basically my winery, I've been very fortunate to kind of bootstrap it to what it is now. And, I still see myself as a vigneron in the French sense. There's really not a word for that in the English language. The closest thing would be wine grower. But now we grow a lot of grapes, we make wine, we still buy fruit from other people. A lot of those people are people that planted vineyards specifically for us, and they farm to our management techniques. And so for us, it's just been kind of a dream, because, you work so hard every day, and sometimes it's good to sit back like in an interview like this and think what you've accomplished, because you don't do it all the time, because you're so close to the grind every day that you don't sit back and look at the big picture and say, hey man, you didn't really start out with a whole lot, and look what you have now. So we need to all be thankful for those things.
That leads like 100% into the next question I was going to ask you, which was just to talk a little bit about what it was like in 2016 to get the Rhone Rangers Lifetime Achievement Award.
That was a big deal for me, just because, it's recognition by your peers. So I think it's really special, and I think, that's why I'm making a point to go this year, because I'm good friends with Steve Edmonds, and it's really nice to see him get it this year. So I think, we all worked our asses off, and that's kind of like, ding, you did a great job.
Absolutely. No, I'm super excited for Steve. He's actually going to be my guest in 2 weeks on this conversation. It's a little like preview of his recognition this year. So I couldn't be happier to have him joining me and then getting the recognition.
Great. Yeah, bravo for Steve.
So can you talk a little bit about your decision in, I think it was 94, to move to the Sierra Foothills? Like, what, at that point, like, how much experience had you had with the region? What drew you there? And what is it about the region that you love so much?
So I grew up in Sacramento. I spent a lot of time in the Sierra Foothills. We used to come up and visit this winery I was talking about occasionally. And then I've always been a great hiker and backpacker, so I'm familiar with the Sierras. I'm familiar with the geology of the Sierras and the geography of the Sierras. So that kind of crossed in my mind with my visits to France. So I started going to France on an annual basis around 1982, and I started walking vineyards and asking questions, and I was in cellars, and I saw a lot of similarities between high elevation sites here, the soil compositions here, which are granitic based and volcanic based, and what's going on in the Northern Rhone. So that was the real lure to this point. was my familiarity with what's here, and that juxtaposed with what I found in France.
Cool. And has it been as you expected, or were there things that have surprised you about the region? What, like how everybody makes decisions with the information that they have to hand, and I'm always interested to know, now that you've been there for 30 years and had that experience of working with it, like, was it what you thought, or has it surprised you?
Um, I would say, you know, there were other aspects to my wine career that informed my um, knowledge of growing grapes. A lot of my experience also came from talking to people who grew Pinot Noir in extreme places in Oregon. So when I had my wine shop, we were the pioneering wine shop to sell Oregon Pinot Noir in California. I was the first guy to get invited as a retailer to go to Steamboat, which was their technical symposium where they had French Burgundian producers and Oregon producers. And we kind of all hung out, blind tasted wines all morning long. And then in the afternoon, we hung out with our kids and wives and friends along the river and swam and just talked about life and about wine. And then we had great dinners. So at one of those events, or maybe actually just going up and tasting in Oregon at one point, I remember tasting with David Lett at Irie Vineyards. And David told me the best place to plant grapes is always right on the edge. He said you plant them, not just grapes, but he said apples, peaches, pears, anything. Plant it where it just makes the finish line every year, and that's the best fruit. So I took that advice when I bought this ranch where I am right now, planted the Syrah vineyard here and a small amount of Viognier. And I would say maybe I pushed the edge a little too much because some years, I would say we get frosted here 2 or 3 out of 10 years. We got, wiped out in 2022. Everything in the Sierra Foothills was wiped out basically from about, 1,800 feet up. So, and we're at like 1,900 feet. But my vineyard here is kind of in a cool canyon. So it's even colder than some of our higher elevation places because all the cold air comes down to this spot from high up. That's what interested me in this spot. As an example, we picked our Syrah here last year at like around 24 bricks on November 1st. So it's a very late site. So what I've learned is, maybe I went too close to the edge. On the other hand, the climate is not static, as we all know now. And we're seeing, if anything, with, more CO2 is more extremes.
Yeah.
So everything is more extreme, just a little exaggerated. So we'll see. This vineyard's not going to last forever. I planted the vineyard, a lot of it on its own roots because it's isolated. So far, the vineyard doesn't have any phylloxera that I'm aware of. But I was informed to do that by my experiences in Portugal, like Quinta do Noval, where they have Nacional vineyard, home-rooted, and they keep replanting it like every 20 or 30 years to keep it going. But a lot of people think home-rooted vines have a greater translation of personality of terroir into the finished wine than grapes that are grown on rootstock. So that was the motivation for doing that.
Yeah, we're experimenting with some new blocks own-rooted. We have a Mourvedre own-rooted block we put in a couple of years ago. And that wasn't specifically to translate terroir, but Mourvedre is always a difficult grape to graft, and we know that it fights that grafting process, and we felt like maybe just trying to give it a slightly less difficult life here, like leave it on its own roots and let it go. We, like you, have no phylloxera, knock on wood, but it seems like a risk that's worth experimenting with.
Yeah. So, other people I farm for, I don't do that because it's not my money. So, and I want everything to be successful. And most of the stuff that we're replanting now that has gotten some disease of some sort, we are using rootstock.
So how has the beginning of the 2024 season been for you? I know it was wet this winter, but like in terms of the spring?
It's been a very cool spring. So I don't think we've gotten into 90 degrees yet. To 90 degrees yet. I think our warmest day has maybe been 85, 88 or something. It's very pleasant today. It's probably going to be in the high 70s. So, we're organic farmers, so we're still fighting the weed battle.
Totally.
And we had a lot of vetch this year growing up into our trellis systems that we didn't plant. We just have a lot of, native vetch here, which is a legume, actually. It's nitrogen fixing, but it grows up into the vine. So actually, I have people out right now pulling vetch out of trellises, and we're still mowing and weed eating and doing all that stuff. And we're not close to flower at all yet. So.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very similar to what we've seen. I was actually wondering if we'd hit 90 yet. I went back and looked at our records. The hottest it's gotten this year is 87, and we've had a lot more days that haven't made it out of the 70s than we have like in the 80s. So it's cool year, similar to last year so far.
Yeah, and the long-term forecasts kind of show it that way. They show kind of a V shape across California, and then around it, it's a lot warmer. But I can remember summers like this 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I can remember wanting to go backpacking just up the hill here when I was living in the Bay Area still, and third week of June getting rained out, so we'll see.
Yeah, well,
you never know.
I'll take it rather than early hundreds.
Right.
Cool. So I only have a couple more questions. We're almost at half an hour, which is always amazing to me. It flies by. But is there anything new you're working on this year? Or anything different? Any experiments that you're looking forward to that you can share?
Sure. Well, my son bought a ranch up here 3 years ago, and it came with a 10-acre vineyard and actually a small winery as well.
Huh?
And he's not interested in having his own label at this stage. He's too busy with his career as an agricultural banker. So I actually lease his small winery, and I bought all the equipment in the winery, which was pretty much state-of-the-art equipment, top pumps, tanks, but it was scaled. Everything was scaled for that vineyard. So smaller, very small tanks. I didn't have any 350-gallon open-top fermenters or lidded, he had a lot of small stuff. So we're making several interesting things on his property. He has a couple of newer Italian clones, both of Sauvignon Blanc and of Barbera from Asti. So we're making those things. They had some Touriga Nacional and some Suzal there that they were probably planning on making port with, the people that had the property before my son. And we made a dry Duro from that. We bottled the first one. We call it Campo de Granito. And it's fabulous. Beautiful fruit, dark color, wonderful natural acidity, a splendid wine. So maybe that's something to expand. The Sauvignon Blanc is kind of our reserve Sauvignon Blanc now. It's utterly delicious. Has beautiful acidity, natural acidity, and beautiful aromatics. There's some Rhone varieties on that property. There's an old vine Zinfandel vineyard. We're bottling that separately. So that's some interesting stuff we're doing. At our main winery, which is about a mile away, last year we made Finati Syrah. So since Steve is retired from winemaking, some of that fruit became available, so I jumped on that. And I would say that's certainly one of our top 3 or 4 Syrah lots in 2023. So we're going to bottle that as a single varietal, single vineyard, and it's fantastic.
Cool.
So those are doing.
That's really fun because the same reason. We got some Finati Grenache and Mourvedre that we're doing a blend of as a special bottling from 2023. So that's one of the wines I'll be tasting this afternoon.
That's great. Sounds great. We'll have to trade once we get them bought.
The deal. Awesome. So if people want to learn more about Demende La Terre Rouge or about your work, what's the best way for them to do that?
Just go to our website, www.terrerougewines.com. There's a lot of information there. If they have more specific questions, they can shoot us an email to the address that's on that website, and it'll get directed to me, and I can answer it.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking a chunk out of your Wednesday afternoon to sit and chat. I'm excited. I'll see you in a month when we're up honoring Steve and at that Rhone Rangers Sonoma celebration. Anybody who is watching, if you want to join us either for the dinner or the tasting that's happening the next day, it's the last weekend in June, and you can find information at rhonerangers.org. But good luck with this growing season. I hope it stays moderate, and at the same time, I hope you don't have to wait until November to pick this year.
All right. Well, I'll see you in a couple of weeks, and thank you for having me as a guest.
Of course. My pleasure. Thanks, Bill.
Adios.
Bye, everybody. See you in a couple of weeks. As I mentioned, I will have Steve Edmonds joining me. Should be fun. It's good. It's Rhone Rangers month here on this discussion. So thank you, Bill. Thanks, everybody, for watching.
All right.